My home university at the moment is Ulster University, which is in the north of Ireland. I've been there since 2021. My academic background is really political philosophy by discipline. That was what my PhD was in. But as part of that research and in all my subsequent research as well, ethnography has been a major influence. So my background in political philosophy spills out into sociology and cultural studies and even anthropology. The subject areas that I've been researching revolve around countercultures and radical politics. Typically that's been anarchist political philosophy and its relationship especially with punk counterculture in different parts of the world. But I've also done research with skateboarding communities on the north coast of Ireland near where I live in Portrush, and now this is expanding into cycling as well and the bike punk culture. In terms of the way I approach these bits of research, no matter which community I'm working with or where in the world, it's all about community collaboration and engagement, and doing research that's useful for these communities, and especially working with marginalised communities. There's very often a lot of suspicion of academic inquiry, which is sometimes well justified. So I use my insider position or insider adjacent position with various countercultures to do research with those communities rather than on them, and not even for them either. It really is about co-creation and meaningful collaboration. So in terms of how that research trajectory applies to the work here at CAPAS, I mentioned the bike punk culture, and the specific aspect of that I'm looking at is a phenomenon called bike wars, which takes place in Copenhagen in Denmark as part of a punk and hardcore festival called K-Town, hosted by Ungdomshuset, a sort of famous punk anarchist social centre in Copenhagen. So the purpose of that research is to better understand bike punk culture, which is not widely written about. I think when I describe this research interest to people, they're maybe a little bit surprised to imagine punks on bicycles. It's maybe not an intuitive connection, but it's certainly a very widespread and interesting connection. So the overarching theme for the CAPAS fellowships this year is biopolitics, and I think there's something interesting about bike punk culture and the bike wars phenomenon in terms of thinking about the bicycle. Very often when you look at government policies, city policies that are environmentally focused, the bicycle is the solution to a lot of problems around car culture. And I'm a bicycle enthusiast myself, and it's great to come to a city like Heidelberg, which has really good infrastructure for cycling. But there's definitely a sense that the bicycle has been included in a kind of green scripting process. So the bike punk phenomenon does something a bit different with bicycles. It has a different hierarchy of motivations for adopting bicyclism. And with something like bike wars, the symbol of the bicycle is actually kind of defiled and played with and deturned and turned into an object that is made monstrous and then destroyed. So I think from that phenomenon, I think there's a different way of thinking about bicycles, and maybe even a different way of thinking about green politics and how that applies to both the biopolitics of the individual and the body, and the biopolitics of communities of people, and how they're nudged from cars into bicycles, for example. That looks different when you think about it from a bike punk perspective. In terms of the research methods, I already spoke a little bit about the importance of community engagement. It's also, or the best way to engage with communities in my experience is through co-creation. And I guess I'm quite lucky that the communities that I have engaged with are focused on particular forms of cultural creation, whether that's music or art or certain sporting activities. And it's the same with the bike wars community in Copenhagen. This is a kind of artistic, culturally focused and exuberant phenomenon. So there's great potential to tap into those various activities in a way that doesn't distract from what the community there are doing. And ideally, the research can even be kind of contributing intervention into that can augment the everyday activities that people are involved with. And then most important at the end is to produce a research output that is useful to that community, or at least interesting to them, or kind of fits with their aesthetics and their ethics as well. So that's the idea. The main issue, or the main kind of line, the current that connects my earlier research with this research is taking punk seriously as a cultural addressing of political problems, and taking punk seriously as a political culture. I think if you speak to anybody about punk, and this happens in public settings or in academic settings, or even amongst other counterculturalists, there's maybe a sense that, you know, punk is dead and punk's moment is past. So rather than make any kind of big theoretical argument around that, my favourite thing to do is just to go and speak to the punks who exist and represent their experiences, and say, well, you might think punk is dead, but here it is. So that's the best counter to that kind of scepticism about the validity of punk. I think occupation of space is another core thread that's gone through my work. I mentioned the interest in squatting previously, which I've looked at in different places. This also overlaps with my recent research into skateboarding in Ireland and its occupation of space. And I think with something like a place like Ungdomshuset, a context like Copenhagen, and the bike wars phenomenon that occupies a public square, that kind of sense of tangibility, taking up space, being seen is really essential, and it's maybe at the core of a kind of punk politics, and their interpretation of anarchism is very much based around being seen and being a visible counterculture. In terms of apocalypse, and this is kind of the hinge point that makes this project fit with CAPAS and the focus on apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic imaginaries and futures. So in Mad Max, it's a post-nuclear Holocaust scenario, global collapse and environmental degradation. Australia is imagined as a desert and enormous dust storms and oppressive heat. So the bad guys in Mad Max are part of a kind of petroculture. It's sometimes been described as a kind of diesel punk sci-fi. They have the war boys as a kind of culture, and they drink gasoline. So it's this kind of reification of petrol, even though it's been a contributing factor in the destruction of their world. In the newest Mad Max movie, Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, which came out in 2024, just last year, there's actually a counterpoint between the petroculture bad guys and this green place of many mothers, which is a tiny little oasis in the middle of this environmental nightmare. And actually, as part of the technology of this green place, you see elements of bicycle technology. They use pedal power to sharpen their machetes, and at one point they even use the sprockets from a bicycle as the frame of a slingshot. So that was really fascinating for me, especially because the movie came out after I'd already made this application. And it was great to see bicycles appearing in the Mad Max universe, and it was interesting the way it was done, because it was very much fitting in with this idea of bicycles as part of a green scripted narrative. The bicycles appeared in the green place, the good guy place, which had a kind of hippie aesthetic as well in terms of the clothes that were worn. They had solar panels, there's wind turbines, and the bicycles are part of that whole imaginary, which is counterposed with the oppressive heat and the dust and the petrol culture of the bad guys. And then what Bike Wars does is something different, because it doesn't just keep the bicycle over here with the good guy aesthetic from Mad Max. It takes the bad guy aesthetic, the punk aesthetic, and puts the bicycle with that. So already that, if you think about bike wars through the Mad Max aesthetic, even though there's visual similarities, something different happens in terms of where the bicycle sits and what that green script does. So I think, yeah, bike wars disrupts the green scripting of the bicycle that we see in mainstream society and that we actually also see in the most recent Mad Max movie. So for me, apocalypse and post-apocalypse, I think for everybody, there's a certain meaning to it in terms of it being part of the zeitgeist. I mean, you can't look anywhere without some kind of invocation of apocalypse. And mostly that's tied to the environmental context and the climate crisis that we're facing. And you see kind of scenes from movies are playing out in the news. They're playing out in the news if you're lucky. They're playing out in your lived reality for a lot of people. So I think that's what makes the research of CAPAS so valuable, even though it's talking about this massive subject which could be interpreted from so many kind of theoretical and abstract backgrounds. We're actually all living in some kind of apocalypse or post-apocalypse now. So I mean, for me, that's the real significance of it. Is I think we're experiencing apocalypse in a particularly pointed way as compared with previous generations. There might be a certain nihilism attached with that, to just say, oh, shrug your shoulders, we're living in apocalypse, what can we do? But a colleague of mine who works at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, called Sean Parson, he's got a new book coming out about punk politics, and he talks there about pragmatic nihilism as the only kind of sensible solution that we can have. The idea that we can intervene now to prevent or reverse the environmental collapse, I think that moment is gone beyond us. So now the question is, okay, we're nihilistic and pessimistic about future prospects, but we still need to exist in those situations. So how can we prepare for that? And maybe that's something, the bike wars is a kind of preparation for that, in terms of how does it feel to live in a world that's like that. So I think being able to spend time thinking about apocalypse in an applied way is, maybe from a personal perspective, I think is part of this kind of preparation for scenarios that are going to unfold. Not in the kind of we're going to go out and be living in a Mad Max universe, but in terms of thinking critically about what apocalypse means for us as individuals and for generations to follow, and how we respond to it politically and socially and culturally, I think is really important to do. So I think the pop culture reference that I probably have to talk about in terms of this project is Mad Max. It would be strange if I didn't. I think so. The most recent movie, actually, as I mentioned, came out just last year, 2024, and it's amazing that the Mad Max franchise, I believe is the term that's used for these movie universes, has lasted, from 1979. The second movie was 1981, 85. The Mad Max Fury Road was in 2015, and now the new one in 2024. So there's such actual richness in the Mad Max universe when you sit down and look at it. I mean, they are, especially the more recent movies, are kind of epic fantasy spectacles. I mean, the war rigs that go around in the 2015 movie Fury Road. There's this character, I think the name's Doof. All the characters have absurd names. There's humour in there too. And he plays this guitar that's a flamethrower, and he's on this rig that drives up the road. It's like a war drum or a war horn, but it's a stack of speakers, like he's in AC/DC or Kiss or something. So there's a kind of the entertainment value of Mad Max is fantastic, and I think even skeptical critics are kind of won over by this sheer joy that comes out of this this movie scenario, this sci-fi universe, even though it's dealing with this horrible apocalyptic context, and there's horrible violence and horrible exploitation of people in there, but watching the spectacle of it is kind of a joyful experience. So if anyone's looking at the Mad Max movies and maybe thinking sort of slightly skeptically about them as just being a kind of ridiculous, absurd fantasy, you know, it's a bunch of punks on motorbikes chasing people up a desert road. I mean, it seems absolutely ridiculous, but the entertainment value is important, and there's also valuable critiques that are in there. So I'm not saying you have to sit and watch Mad Max and think about it absolutely seriously. Enjoy it, but I think the influence of Mad Max on how we think about certain visions of apocalypse, and the influence of Mad Max on punk culture and punk aesthetics is actually really interesting. So yeah, I think even from my own experience, just looking at the Mad Max movies more carefully in the last few months, I've really begun to appreciate them on a new level. And if you read interviews with George Miller, the way he thinks about the Mad Max sci-fi universe, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on there. So yeah, I'll fly the flag for Mad Max.